Here we go then, the BF5 Gamescom trailer titled Devastation of Rotterdam will go live tomorrow at 6 AM Pacific time. That's 2 PM London, and they just released a few tiny clips from that trailer. We can't really make much out, to be honest with you. Tiger tanks, urban combat, hey, that looks like World War II now. Yay. There are some brief glimpses of new guns and equipment here too, but I'll wait until the full trailer tomorrow before diving into all of that. We also got this screenshot too. Lovely. So tomorrow we'll see more of what the team have been putting together. Moving on, you may know that a second alpha for BF5 is currently going on. If you've got access to the first one, then you'll still have access to this test too. And there are chances to get keys from various content creators, YouTubers, streamers and developers on social media, so be on the lookout. They've also sent out a lot more codes to random players, so make sure to check your email. Now let's start by saying that there isn't much of a change between this alpha and the first one. You'll be playing on the same map with the same weapons, same vehicles and on the same game modes. And I know this will upset some people, we all want more content and fresh content at that, but just remember that this is of course an alpha and its purpose is to test. This particular alpha gives DICE a very good testing platform for weapon balance, because then they can really get a 1-to-1 AB comparison between both of these tests, and that's exactly what they've done. That being said, there are some bug fixes and improvements to both matchmaking and squad joining, and from my experience yesterday that works as it should this time around. So what's changed then? Well, the Irma machine and pistol has had its max damage range decreased from 12 to 8 meters, its fall off range decreased from 50 to 40 meters, and then its minimum damage increased to 14.3. What does it all mean? Well, it's going to make the Irma better at close ranges but not as well equipped at long ranges. Something similar has been done to the STG with the goal of making that less powerful up close but more powerful at medium range. I definitely think this has worked, but that doesn't mean it's a good change, more on that in a second. To accompany this, the STG's max damage was decreased from 27 damage to 20, and that in itself potentially means that you'll need an extra bullet to kill with. That being said, the range at which you can do that max damage has been increased from 11 to 20 meters. The MP40 on the other hand has been changed to make it more effective at close range while being less effective at long ranges, and you definitely notice this, at least I do compared to the first alpha. It's far less viable at medium range compared to what it was. Sure, you can still get kills, but it's not quite the laser beam that it was, and the gun's max damage range was decreased and the fall off range was moved from 50 to 40. There are some changes to the Bren, the MG34, the Gewehr 43 and also the Kar 98. The car has had its max damage increased to 90 from 80, but its minimum damage decreased to 55 from 60. Bullet velocity is also reduced from 700 to 600, so now you do have to account for a little bit more drop and lead. There have been some tweaks to the attrition system too, and you will notice that when you start the game with more ammo for some of the guns right now. So what's the point in all of this? Well, the purpose is to find the sweet spot for the gunplay in BF5. Right now in this test, as a result of the weapon changes, the time to kill feels a bit longer than it previously was. And we mentioned earlier that DICE have a perfect chance here to directly compare data from both tests and see what worked best. I personally think that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle between the first alpha and this one. Right now the time to kill is perhaps a bit too long on some of the weapons. The STG definitely weaker up close, which was the intent, but the question is it too weak? I think it's still perfectly viable. But that weapon in particular could do with being somewhere in between where it is now and where it was. The important thing to remember here is that these changes are not final, they're in testing. Right now DICE are gathering data to see what works. Don't think that just because this is how it plays in the alpha that that's how it's going to be on launch. There's a long way to go before then and plenty more testing and changing to be done. And speaking of testing, we already know that there will be an open beta in September, and from what DICE and EA have been saying on Twitter, the Gamescom and beta build is far ahead of the one that we're currently playing in the alpha. David Serland, one of the lead devs on the game, said playing the BF5 closed alpha just after the Gamescom open beta build makes you appreciate just how much awesome work has gone into the game since May. And this is pretty normal actually. I think sometimes when players get their hands on an alpha or a beta, they assume that this is where the game is up to, but that's just not the case. This build that we're playing right now is probably months old, and time doesn't just sit still. DICE are constantly working on improving and updating the game in that time, fixing bugs, adding features. We're just not allowed to play an up-to-date build yet. I can imagine then some people would say, well, why don't we have the latest version? Well, it's not always that simple, I guess. I imagine a lot of time goes into putting together a test version, and in this instance DICE wanted to have two identical builds so they could gain data without gaining any extra interference with that. It does make makes sense if you think about logically A/B testing things. I believe they mentioned that they're testing some of the progression systems too. Now, David Serland did confirm on Twitter that the beta Gamescom build of the game does have a new map. Does that mean that the beta in September will grant us a new map? Hopefully, I'm sure everyone would love that, but I've got a feeling that when players get their hands on the most up-to-date build of the game at either Gamescom or during the September beta, they will hopefully notice the work and updates and features that have gone into the game. With that in mind though, there are still some things that need addressing in my opinion. One thing worth saying is that some of these that I'm going to talk about may have already been addressed. Now, we've already spoke about this version not being the most up to date, so it's possible that these things have been implemented or fixed. First up, the revive delay. It's still in there, but as I understand it will be removed, so fingers crossed that's implemented in the next build of the game. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to the slight delay you've got after you've completed a revive. It was there in the first alpha too, but it's something that's already been brought up, so I think in a future build that won't be present. Some quick thoughts on the Panzerfaust. There are a few things here that frustrate me with it. First off, you have to ADS to fire a shot. That's fine. That's a balance thing, I don't have a problem with that, but when you do aim down the sight, there seems to be a slight delay before you can actually fire, which really prevents you from doing fast shots sometimes. Maybe that's intentional to slow the pace down, or if it's a bug, I don't know. Either way, I find it a touch on the annoying side. It feels a bit clunky. I also think that when you spawn, you have way too many rockets at the beginning of a game. You get 5 per assault player, and then you can instantly resupply them at any ammo station. When you consider that there's an ammo station on every flag, that means that you always have rockets available for the most part. In fact, if you sit on a flag and fire off some at a tank, you can then fully replenish all of your rockets instantly. I feel like there needs to be some sort of restriction or cooldown on how many you can gain back over a certain amount of time. Maybe even start with less at the beginning of the game, much like the ammo in your primary weapon, and you've got to go to an ammo station to get more. And this leads me to one of the things that I'm noticing right now is that tanks are just like sitting ducks. As an assault player with 5 rockets and dynamite, and with the turret being far slower in BF5, it really isn't that hard to take a tank down by yourself. And then you factor in that there could be multiple players at once shooting at them with Panzerfausts, and then you can just resupply again to follow the next ammo station and go again, while they themselves have quite limited ammunition. Now, I'm primarily an infantry player, you guys know that, so honestly, I've really enjoyed playing a Battlefield game where tanks and planes haven't always dominated and caused frustration. But the reality is that this is a Battlefield game, and they need a bit of a buff to make them a bit more useful. I feel like a tank should be scary, but with enough skill, maybe you could solo it, and they require a bit of teamwork to take down. One other complaint I've seen quite a lot relates to the bleed out mechanic. When you die, currently your body remains on the ground while you bleed out. Now, you can press a button to slow down the process and hold on if you think a medic can get to you. Now, a lot of players don't enjoy doing this and having to wait and sit around on the ground to bleed out when they know that a medic isn't around or there's just too many enemies. Daniel Berlin, another top dev on the game, has said on Twitter that they actually have a system in place now for this, but it isn't in the alpha build of the game. And he said that they have a bleed out function so that if you know there are no medics or squad mates around you, you can choose to bleed out faster. I know that this is intended to make it less frustrating when you're on the ground, unable to do anything, but I can't help but feel like this might end up with players always skipping revive like in BF1. Perhaps the new system will take longer than that, we'll see. Medics will be rushing to revive players and they're just going to be choosing to bleed out instead, meaning you get there and they've respawned. I hope that isn't the case. I think there's a middle ground here, so let's see how it works in the next build before judging it too quickly. Although I have to admit that I don't mind there being a skip mechanic, especially if you know there are no medics around. No one enjoys being forced to sit there on the ground unable to properly play the game. It's really boring. You may have also noticed some HUD elements are a little hard to see. Sometimes the kill feed, the ticket count, or even your squad mates' names can be washed out because of the white nature of the map. I don't think this will be as much of a problem on other maps as it is on this one because it's so bright and of course white, but they do have a fix in the works. Right now you can change up your HUD background opacity to make these things more visible, but it creates a weird shadow effect underneath them, but that is just temporary until a full fix is introduced down the line. Last up, there's been some talk of visibility problems in BF5. I think some players are still struggling to see others, and while I can't say I've had too many problems seeing players for the most part, I think that the snow visual effects are still a bit too strong at times, and I know we mentioned this last time around, so I hope it's been turned down for a future build if it already hasn't. And I think other than that, players need to remember that without 3D spotting, enemies are naturally going to be harder to spot and will blend into the environment more. I think it will just take time to change up your playstyle and get into the habit of scanning the environment more for shapes that look out of place or movement rather than a red Dorito triangle. So that's about it for the alpha. To be honest with you, I'm kind of sick of playing this map, but I do think that the gameplay in BF5 is shaping up to be excellent, and I can't wait to get my hands on the beta build of the game. So when I do, I'll have capture for you and a full breakdown of everything, what's changed, what's new, where it's at, and just how it plays. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked it, give it a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.